And you must have a lot of space up there because you're kind of bouncing all over.
Good evening and welcome to a regular meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council. It is the second Tuesday of October, October 20th, 2020, 6 p.m. I'd like to call this regular meeting to order and invite you to stand tonight and join us in an invocation led by Pastor Josh Hubbard of the Life Church. And following that, I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pastor Josh? You're muted. Hey, Josh, you're muted.
There we go. All right, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for those gathered here this evening, in particular, our city council. Grant them wisdom in making decisions that help shape not only public policy, but also decisions that affect the success of this city and its future. Give them discernment, endurance, and encouragement to pursue unity behind the common cause to build this wonderful city. May you continue to protect the people of this city and its civic leaders. Bless each and every person gathered here as the leaders commence in tonight's meeting. Amen.
I'm muted. Due to COVID-19, there is no physical meeting location per Washington Proclamation 2028. Tonight's meeting may be viewed live via YouTube. In addition, to listen to the live meeting, the public may call 623-404-9000 and enter the meeting ID number 149766 1467, and this is for audio only. Council members and city staff are participating via teleconference. The staff sitting in council chambers are all physically distanced at least 6 feet apart and will be wearing masks when they are not speaking. I want to thank our public, the city council, and city staff for working with us as we continue to follow the ever-changing requirements related to COVID-19. So at this time, I'd like to ask our city clerk, Julie Lindsay, to do our roll call. Julie?
Thank Mayor Pro Tem Munns,
Here.
Councilmember Heisen,
Present.
Councilmember Mack, Councilmember Mack,
Present.
Councilmember Servadius,
Present.
Councilmember Wassinger,
Present.
Councilmember Goebel.
Present.
Okay, so Councilmember Wiesner has asked to be excused from this meeting, so I would entertain a motion to excuse him at this time. Mayor Pro Tem.
I move that we excuse Councilman Jim Wiesner for tonight's meeting.
Second.
Got a motion second to excuse Councilor Wiesner from tonight's meeting. Motion by Mayor Pro Tem Munn, second by Councilor Wassinger. All in favor, say aye. Raise your hand. That passes unanimously. Okay, thank you. Guests that are included in staff presentations will be excused from the Ring Central meeting at the at the conclusion of the agenda item as appropriate. So I would like to then start with the approval of our agenda. Are there any changes that anyone would like? If not, we'll accept the agenda as presented, and we will move then to proclamations. We don't have any presentations this evening, so we'll go right to our citizen comment period. This is a time where citizens may comment on subjects of interest not listed on the agenda or items listed on the consent agenda. Public comments may be submitted electronically to the city clerk at jlindsay@oakharbor.org or by calling 360-279-4539 after 5 p.m. on the Friday preceding the meeting and prior to the agenda item. To ensure comments are recorded properly, please state your name clearly when leaving a message and limit the comments to 3 minutes. Did we have any actual comments, citizen comments for, okay? Okay, we have some public hearing comments, which we will take as we get into the agenda. So then we'll move on at this time to the consent agenda, and I believe that is section 4 of our agenda. We have items number A through F. Is there any? I see a couple of hands here. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a couple of questions on consent agenda D, the purchase authorization of the playground,
Okay,
and on E, I had a couple of questions.
okay. And I see Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. Just also a question on E.
Okay, great. Then we'll consider items A, B, C, and F approved then at this time, and we will then go back to item number D. Mayor Pro Tem, would you like to start?
Yes, just wait. Had to make sure I wasn't muted. Where is Tie House Playground? I'm sorry, I couldn't figure that out.
Oh, it's really hard for me to explain without a map. I can send that out to you tomorrow if you'd like.
That would be great.
Yeah,
And-
I'll send a copy of the entire parks map to all council members tomorrow.
Oh, that would be great. Then I could save it. The other question I had about it was they talked about the $80,000 to buy the equipment and they had pictures. Is the same equipment being bought also at the same time for Coochie Park? Also?
And that's a follow-on project.
Okay, follow on. But looking at using the same state bidding for it?
Yes.
Okay, I kind of got confused when they mentioned both parks. Okay, no questions. That sounds great to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Servadius?
No other questions. Mayor Pro Tem on E. Before I go, you had mentioned that as well.
Oh, yes, I do. In the sole purchase of the membranes, it isn't so much the sole purchase, but it's $500,000. And then when you get down to public hearing, 6A, we're supposed to be approving a transfer. It seems like the transfer, would it have to be approved before we approve buying the membranes?
No, 6A is the money that's going to come from the stabilization fund to the wastewater fund due to not adjusting utility rates this year. So the funding for the purchase of the membranes is coming from our cumulative reserve fund. It's not our wastewater operating fund. When new developments come in and they pay the system development fees, they go into our cumulative reserve fund, which is Fund 413. And because this is adding capacity to the wastewater treatment plant, we can use those system development funds, the cumulative reserve, to pay for it because it's adding capacity and can handle additional growth. So
Okay.
the development fees can only be used for growth-related projects.
Okay, thank you for separating it. It just seemed like we were kind of going backwards on spending more money than we were anyway. All right, thank you very much, Ms. Rosen. I appreciate that.
Go ahead, Councilor Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. Just probably a little bit of a dovetail off Councilmember Munn's comments there, Ms. Rosen. The system development charges, I forget the fund number, you said 514 maybe. Could those have been used for, what could those be used for? And specifically, could they in any way be used to lower citizens' rates?
So they can only be used for growth-related projects. So if we have, for example, that big lift station over in the Goldie Road, Coochie Street area that we need to help develop that area, system development fees could be used for something like that. I do believe that we may be able to use them for to help pay down the bonds because we did add capacity when we built the treatment plant. But Sean Korn would know better than I on that one. He would be the best one to ask on that.
Okay. The reason I asked, we've got some public comment coming up later on when we do the public hearing for the rate increases. We always appreciate hearing from the public. It means that they're involved, they're following along. I know there was an article last month, I think right at the tail end of last month, had a catchy headline, of course, which helps get attention. But the article was about these cartridges. And specifically, I thought I had recalled in a workshop that we talked about these cartridges being paid for from those system development fees. It's not coming from, an increase in rates, or that portion of it is not coming from the ratepayer. And so I just think it's important to get as much of that information out there, and hopefully the Woodby News Times will do some digging when they write these articles and include exactly who and how that's getting paid for if we do approve this tonight. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Council. So we have items D and E from the consent agenda left. Do you want to, yes, Mayor Pro Tem?
I move that we accept items D and E on the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to accept items D and E. Motion by Mayor Pro Tem Munn, second by Councilor Wassinger. Any other input or questions? All in favor, raise your hand. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. So at this point, we will move on to section number 5. Mayor comments. I've got several things I'd like to comment on. The CARES North Whidbey Island Small Business Relief Grant update. As of this week, the city has issued $270,930.78 to 48 businesses. There are 12 businesses in process for an additional funding amount of $121,367. For questions about reimbursements, please contact the CARES Grant Program Assistant, Jay Lovelady, via email cares@oakharbor.org. Thank you to Island County and the City of Oak Harbor staff for their continued work on this process. The community response to COVID-19, I would like to thank Island County Health Director Keith Higman and NAS Whidbey Island Commanding Officer Captain Arney for their efforts in coordinating with me on the ongoing response to COVID-19 in our community. As a reminder, Island County is still in modified and reduced phase 3, which limits social gatherings to 10 people. It will be especially important to be mindful of your family's health with the approaching holiday season. The CDC and the State Department of Health and Island County have all released guidance on Halloween and the risk levels associated with Halloween activities. More details and resources about the local impact of COVID-19 can be found on our website at www.oakharbor.org /COVID-19. So ballots have been mailed. You can still register to vote if you have not registered. The deadline to register to vote is October 26th. Go to www.votewa.gov to register or confirm your voter registration. There is a ballot box in front of City Hall where you can deposit your ballot. Island County Elections Office services the ballot box. The utilities counter at City Hall cannot assist with voter resources. Please contact the Island County Auditor at their phone number 360-679-7366 or by email at elections@islandcountywa.gov for assistance with voting. Support for the Port Townsend-Coupeville Ferry Run route. Both Mayor Pro Tem Munns and I have written letters to Governor Inslee to request that he direct the Washington State Department of Transportation to maintain the Port Townsend-Coupeville Ferry service with minimal, if any, cutbacks, and asking that he look elsewhere for budget or service reductions. The cuts in service being considered will only compound the already depressed economic climate we are experiencing as a result of COVID-19. Residents, visitors, and U.S. Navy personnel rely on this and other ferry runs as extensions of our state highways, and they are every bit as vital to our economy as those paved roadways they link together. Maintaining this vital service for our citizens and for our military should be given the highest priority. Finally, clean water facility updates. Mayor Pro Tem Munns had requested that updates be given for items associated with the completion of this facility. At staff's presentation on September 1st, they reported punch list items were complete with only warranty items remaining to be resolved. In light of this, does council wish to continue to receive updates for the warranty items? So that, you can let us know how you feel about that. If you'd like continuing reports, please let us know. And with that, we'll go to council comments. Council comments. I see Mayor Pro Tem. Mayor Pro Tem Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. My comment is to my fellow council members. Get yourself in and sign the vouchers. They can't pay the bills unless we come in and sign. It used to be easy on our council meetings. They would pass it around the dais and we would all sign. But they need 3 signatures on all the vouchers. So please take your time. If you're running to the store, whatever, just zip by City Hall and please sign them. These poor people can't settle our bills unless we do. So let's do our part to help them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilor Servadius. Councilor Servadius?
Thank you. So just want to give a quick shout out and share an experience I had a couple of weeks ago. Sunday morning was getting gas at Safeway gas station, and witnessed a gentleman where there's that typical spot where they'll panhandle, clearly having a rough morning. Probably having an emotional breakdown, mental health issues. I'm assuming maybe some substance abuse. And I watched an interaction of 3 of our officers, and I just want to give them a huge shout out. Officers Rang, Moses, and at the moment I'm forgetting the other gentleman's name. I can see his face. He's one of our newer officers. They just conducted themselves with an amazing amount of discipline, restraint, considering the abuse they were taking from this individual. And I thought it was going to turn into a physical altercation. And finally, Officer Rang was able to really de-escalate the situation with a water bottle. It was quite impressive. But to all of those officers, I called Chief Dresker right after it occurred and just wanted to give them my gratitude and show some appreciation. I know for every time that probably happens to them 10 times a day where they have those kind of interactions. And the public never sees that. They never know how much they're doing behind the scenes. And yet I sat there 15 feet away watching it happen firsthand and was just blown away by their professionalism. And I know occasionally there are incidents in our current climate with a video culture that get captured on camera that aren't reflective of all of those folks in uniform and our first responders. So to those officers, and I apologize, you know who you are, or Chief Dresker will make sure and give you another set of kudos, but it was Rang, Moses, and another one of our officers that Sunday morning. Excellent work, gentlemen. Thank you.
It's nice to hear. Thank you, Councillor Servadius. Councillor Wassinger.
Thank you, Mayor. I apologize, Mayor Pro Tem Munns. I go in every month and I totally slipped my mind to go back there and sign the vouchers. We need a big sign like wear your mask when you come in. Don't forget to sign the vouchers because it just slipped my mind. But I'll remember to be better about doing that when I stop in. I also wanted to speak to the updates on the wastewater treatment plant just really quickly. I would like to at least get some reports until just updates on the smell situation. Once again, I was down there, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was just still really, really, really bad and upsetting to me. So I just would like to get updates on the progress of that. I know that it's being worked on, but that's one issue that I think is outstanding still that I'd like to hear about. Not necessarily right now, but in the future as we're getting that figured out. And I think that's all I had to say. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other council comments? Okay, seeing none, I guess then we'll move to City Administrator Oborn comments.
All right, first of all, on the Clean Water Facility monthly report, appreciate the request, and then we will go ahead and continue to do that monthly in the first council meeting of the month and give you updates focusing on some of the issues and such as the odor issue that you're referring to. So thank you for your input, Councillor. Moving on, good news on the staffing side. Our finance director, Dave Goldman, is starting on this Monday, and then also a week from there, November 2nd. We have our new parks manager, Jesse Ott, starting. So welcome to those 2 people, and great hires, and we welcome to our organization. On the residential construction side, I'm excited about the Howards Point subdivision, 19-home subdivision that has started grading this week. So good progress there. We do have a 60-unit Park Terrace apartments under construction now. And then moving on to commercial construction or retail construction. Starbucks is open now, and we have 3 other businesses opening soon in that area. So good effort on the staff and doing all the permitting and seeing that through. Speaking of construction there too, we have the new stabilization center, the county stabilization center, and the mayor, our PIO, and our police chief, and I were able to tour it on Friday. Great facility, and appreciate that, and the opportunity to see that facility before it gets open, and it's scheduled to open in January. And I think that concludes my report. Thank you.
So I would like to add that at the Board of Health meeting today, they did talk about that stabilization center, and I think that they'd much enjoy small groups and especially anybody from City Council that would be interested in looking at that. Jackie Henderson is the person at the county that's setting those up, but they wanted to make sure to let you know that you're invited. Please come out and have a look at it. So we will then, I guess at this point, move on to our first item under public hearings and meetings. And tonight, there will be an opportunity. I think we have some comments during this time, which our city clerk had talked about earlier, which we will share. And obviously, we have asked the public about this section and this rate discussion is nothing new to you folks. This has been before you on several discussions in the past here. And tonight, our first section is item number 6A, Resolution 20-27, approving the interfund transfer of $400,000 from excess stabilization funds to the wastewater utility fund. And I think we have asked our accountant, Tally Boyer, to help us present this item, but we've actually got Sean Korn here with us for questions. But I'm going to turn it over to Tally right now to give a brief presentation. Tally?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. I'm Tally Boyer, an accountant in the Finance Department. As part of the finance team, I have been working with Sean Korn from HDR on the utility rate study. Sean will present the information next, but the proposed wastewater rates are dependent upon a transfer of $400,000 of the excess stabilization funds to the wastewater fund to offset the utility rate increase. So that is what I am presenting to you today in Resolution 2027. Next slide, please. Let me start with a brief history. In December 2018, Council passed Ordinance Number 1843. A copy of that ordinance is included in your packet. The ordinance reduces the balance of the stabilization fund as the amount was deemed higher than recommended by best practices. The ordinance made available approximately $1.6 million earmarked as excess stabilization funds. The ordinance also provided council flexibility as to the use of these funds. In 2019, council authorized the use of approximately $184,000 for repairs to the fire department's ladder truck. This left a balance of approximately $1.4 million of excess stabilization funds. Next slide, please. The proposed transfer of $400,000 would leave a remaining balance of just under $1 million, $984,850 to be exact. Next slide, please. And so what is the recommended action? That you guys propose a motion to approve Resolution 20-27, approving the interfund transfer of $400,000 from excess stabilization funds to the wastewater utility fund. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tally. I don't know whether, if we have any questions at this time. I guess Sean's here. He's been helping in this process. Is Mike Bailey with us this evening also? I don't know whether he is, but.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, just, yeah, in case there are any questions. But I think I'll turn to council. I guess before we get to the actual discussion on the rate adjustments, we will look at the input from the public and ask Julie to help us with that. But I'll go back to council at this time to ask if there are any questions. Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. So we had over 25% and we changed it so that it was too high to make it 10%. So this is the excess. Do we need to pay back into this excess fund, whatever we take out of it, or not?
No, we do not. This is excess funds. Every year we contribute to the stabilization fund based on the 10%. So this money is earmarked. When it's gone, it's gone.
All right, a follow-on question is, the reason we're doing this is because in June, we did not propose, or we voted down or didn't approve a rate increase on our utilities at that time. So we are missing money from June to the end of December because we didn't make up the difference of our bills. Do you know approximately how much money that is total from June to the end of December that we need to make up?
I do not. I can refer that to Sean if he has that answer.
Yeah, I can give a shot at it. I don't have an exact number. It's a number I can provide back to the council. But when we calculated that earlier, I want to say it was somewhere around $600,000 to $700,000 that under the no rate adjustment scenario, which drove the additional increase in 2021, that drove the discussion of using available excess reserve funds.
Thank you. I remember some number like that, but I don't think people realize that we've actually used savings to make up that difference, to not add in that rate increase at the time because nobody knew what was going to happen. So thank you very much, Sean and Talia. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. I'm not sure who this question's for. Ms. Rosen hinted at it earlier. If we were to approve this, this is I'm always, well, let me say, this is in essence, in a way, what these funds are for, but I'm always hesitant to use a non-recurring revenue source to fill a recurring expense. And so is this 400,000 basically backfilling the lag in 2020? Ms. Rosen, is that what you alluded to earlier, if you're the person to answer that? Does that question make sense?
Yes, but I think I would prefer to have Sean answer how this all works.
Okay, please,
Yeah.
Sean. And I guess what I'm looking for is, I'm hesitant. I want to keep the burden on the ratepayers as low as possible, but I want to be realistic that we're not using up the stabilization fund, an emergency fund essentially, and not being completely transparent that this isn't going, I'm hoping this helps fix the problem and isn't just a very short-term Band-Aid, and we're not telling the complete story, but I'm assuming we are. I want to make sure that we are.
Yeah, I believe I understand your question. Thank you for clarifying a bit. As this is a one-time revenue, as you stated, so it does only reduce the impact in 2021 as we go into that. We've offset the need for an additional rate increase. And so that balanced with Mayor Pro Tem's question, we're using reserves plus this general fund transfer to minimize the impacts of the shortfall in 2020 and reduce the impacts in 2021. It is, I wouldn't call it a Band-Aid, it is a smoothing approach to allow the council to reduce those rates in the early years and blend that in over the long term to minimize the bill impacts.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any other council questions? Okay. What's that? Oh, Mike Bailey?
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to reiterate what Sean was saying, that using this resource to smooth the rates, smoothing the rates is a best practice. So I think that's consistent with prudent council action. Secondly, I would refer back to Council Member Munn's comments about essentially filling the gap from postponing the rate increase while council better understood the economic circumstances of the community. Using this one-time money to fill that one-time gap kind of makes sense. Lastly, I would say that council has been apprised with Sean's work of what the future rates would be to sustain the utility on an ongoing basis. And so I think that Councilmember Servatius's observations are very right on, but I think that given the circumstances that this continues to represent a prudent practice, and I would recommend council approve.
Okay, so we have, I guess, no other questions at this point. So I'd like to turn to our city clerk, Julie, to read the script for how public comment was taken during the COVID-19 virtual meeting format, and indicate if there's any public comment.
Thank you, Mayor. The city published a legal notice for tonight's public hearing in the Whidbey News-Times on October 3rd and October 10th. Information on the proposed rate adjustments was provided on the city website. Public comment methods provided were completing a comment form on the city website, sending the city clerk an email, leaving the city clerk a voicemail message to be played at the council meeting, or completing a written comment card at the utilities office. The city received no comments regarding Resolution 2027. There were comments that we will show later regarding the ordinance.
Okay. So, Councillor Wassinger.
Thank you, Mayor. If there's no other questions or comments or public comments, I will go ahead and make the motion.
Okay.
Okay, I move to approve Resolution 2027, approving the interfund transfer of $400,000 from excess stabilization funds to the wastewater utility fund.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second that reads exactly like the recommended action in your packet. Motion made by Councillor Wassinger and second by Mayor Pro Tem Munns. Any other input or questions? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, say, or raise your hand. I can't get used to that. Okay, that passes passes unanimously. Thank you very much. So we will move on then to ordinance number 1899, utility rate adjustment. And again, you've looked at this and talked about this on several occasions. We went over, or we have those dates. If anybody's interested, I think that we'll ask Sean Korn to do an abbreviated presentation, but he's got the entire presentation that you saw at our last workshop, I believe it was. Sean? How's he doing? Is he?
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Good to see you again this evening. As the mayor stated, I have a summary of the presentation. These are many of the same slides and information, but I want to walk through this process with you again as we move through the rate setting process. So I just wanted to touch on that process a little bit. I'll go over the rate study history, the key drivers, and overall assumptions that were developed as part of the study. Next steps would be a council discussion, public hearing, and then as directed by the city council, adoption of the proposed rates and implementation of those rates as identified through this rate study and council discussion. So as you all know, the purpose of the rate study is really to develop a long-term financial plan with the sustainable rate revenues for each of the 4 utilities. So we're looking at the water, sewer, stormwater, and solid waste utilities. Each of these funds is an enterprise fund, which by definition means that they must be on a standalone basis, and revenues from these funds, revenues from rates support these funds on an ongoing basis to fund our annual operating and capital needs. We developed the analysis around the city's financial policies and metrics, so looking at debt service coverage ratio requirements, minimum target reserves, and so on. We also needed to incorporate in this study some changing conditions and characteristics for each of the utilities. And we developed these analyses based on generally accepted methodologies as outlined by the American Water Works Association or the Water Environment Federation as examples, but tailored to the city's specific accounts, costs, and customer characteristics. Some of the key assumptions of the studies for each of the utilities, the starting point was the 2019 and 2020 budgets. These are based on a capital funding analysis that reflect the most recent capital improvement plans. These are plans that have been revised during this process of discussing the rates with the City Council to minimize and smooth the rates over a long-term period. In early discussions of these analyses, it was determined that the interpretive center at the Clean Water Facility would be excluded, so that funding and those expenses are removed from the analysis. Another key element of this, and it was briefly touched on the prior item that we just discussed, is that we are using available reserves over this time period, 21 through 24. I will note that the rate adjustments and the proposed rates that we're discussing tonight are only for 2021 and 2022. Some of the key elements of the analysis for the water utility were the addition of future capital improvement needs to address the Campbell Lake transmission pipeline relocation. That was added in 2022 at approximately $2.3 million. On the wastewater side, as we've discussed, we have in 2020 and forward, we have the full debt service hitting the rates on an annual basis. So over the last 4 to 6 years, we've been slowly transitioning that debt service up over time. We are now at the level that it will stabilize for the long-term period. A key driver in this discussion and analysis for the wastewater utility is then maintaining that minimum debt service coverage ratio. And for our total debt, which includes revenue bonds and low interest loans, the state revolving fund loans, we maintain at a minimum a 1.0 coverage, which means that after we pay our operating costs from our revenues, we have that same amount to fund our overall debt service on an annual basis. So essentially we can pay the bills at a 1.0. We're running slightly above that, which is prudent. You don't target your absolute legal minimum, because then if there are issues or concerns with expenses or revenues over the long term, we're not able to take care of those issues. On the solid waste side, we had disposal increases from Island County of 200% on the recycling side over the last couple of years, and garbage disposal increases of 26%. So that has a fairly significant impact on the solid waste expenses on an annual basis. Storm drain was fairly straightforward. We did revise that capital improvement plan, but that utility is undergoing a comprehensive planning process right now. And as that process is established, there may be additional capital needs identified in the future, along with the future permit cycle that may require additional O&M for the city to address as they maintain the stormwater system. As we talk about some of the key metrics, I mentioned the debt service coverage ratio. That's the ability of the city's utilities to repay any long-term debt. It's the credit check for these utilities, similar to what we have when we buy a house or a car on a personal basis. As I mentioned, we're targeting a minimum of 1.0 for all debt and 1.25, which is the legally required amount for the municipal revenue bonds. As we go through this process, we reviewed the different reserve funds. As we mentioned, in prior meetings, we have reduced the reserve fund minimum target from 25% to 20% for stormwater and solid waste. We have maintained the 25% target for water and wastewater. That's really driven by the need to maintain adequate reserves given the level of debt on the wastewater side, and then also given the variability that can happen on the water side given how much revenue we collect through the consumption-based charge. So a really wet summer really can have a significant impact on the revenues of the water utility. As we go through this, we've talked about various scenarios and alternatives with the councils through a couple different workshops and meetings. Currently, we're not proposing any change to the current rates in 2020, the year we're in right now, but we are proposing adjustments to the rate structure for 2021 and 2022, the 2 years of focus of this discussion. On the water side, there is no change to the proposed overall level of revenues from the water utility. On stormwater, no change in 2021. There is a inflationary adjustment projected in 2022. On solid waste and sewer, there are adjustments planned. The adjustment in 2021 reflects the additional reserves that were just enacted by the council, transfer from the general fund excess reserve, which minimizes the impact in 21 and allows us to smooth the rates over the long term. So a quick summary of the analysis. As I mentioned, the overall water rate study, we have minimal adjustments for this utility, even with the addition of the Campbell Lake pipeline relocation project. We are using reserves over this next 4-year period to minimize the overall adjustments, approximately $875,000 of available reserves, to bring that fund about down to its minimum target. We are looking at long-term at 2022, so 2023 and on, approximately 3% based on the current plans and information we have. On the storm drain side, very similarly, we have shifted capital improvement needs to minimize the overall impacts to rates. We are also using approximately $280,000 of available reserves over this next 3-year window, 2022 through 2024, to minimize those rate adjustments. On the solid waste side, to smooth in and transition the rates in, we are using $570,000 in 2021 and 2022. That's really there to offset the increases from Island County on the recycling and disposal increases. We also are not meeting our minimum targets on the reserves, even at the reduced 20% level. So in the out years, 2024, we're looking at slightly greater increases in sewer than inflationary levels to get those targets back up to their minimum balance. On the wastewater side, we have included the $400,000 transfer from the general fund, and we have a long-term plan for 2021 and out of the rate adjustments as part of that. That is really driven by the need to maintain at least a minimum all-in debt service coverage ratio of 1.0 times. So as I explained earlier, making sure that after O&M is paid for, then we have sufficient funds to pay the annual principal and interest on the long-term borrowing. We are not meeting our reserve targets in the wastewater utility, and we're using approximately $1.4 million of reserves to, again, minimize those rate adjustments. Now, these years right now, as we started projecting this out, starting back in 2010 and on, we've always had a pinch point at some time in 2019, 2021 time period. We're at that pinch point now. The plan was to use available reserves early on in this process to minimize rates to the greatest extent possible as we work through this period where we are transitioning to the maximum debt, annual debt service payments. So annual rate adjustments, we split the slide here with the dashed vertical line. 2021 and 2022, we have the adjustments for solid waste and wastewater. In 22, we have storm drain, wastewater, and solid waste adjustments. Again, looking out into the future, there are additional adjustments necessary. The focus tonight is on the next 2-year period for ordinance number 1899. Quick summary of the reserve funds. You can see on the water side in the top left, we bring those right down to minimum reserves over the next 2-year period. Storm drain is a little slower, but we also have additional capital outside of this window starting in 2026 and 2027 that need to be funded through reserves. That's why we're slightly higher at the current time. You can see solid waste, we go below targets and we reach those targets by 2024. And on the wastewater side, we're getting to our targets. Again, this was built into the historical plans. We knew we'd have a dip and then we'd work back up to those targets over a multi-year period. So on a combined basis, looking at the left-hand slide, or left-hand part of the slide is the current rates combined for each of the utilities. You have the numbers down below. Hopefully they're not too small to read there. For wastewater, the red or the top bar, solid waste, the green in the middle, storm drain, the blue, and water on the bottom in the dark blue. As you go across in 21, the only changes are in wastewater and solid waste. In 22, similar changes in wastewater and solid waste, but then a small increase in the stormwater rate for ordinance number 1899. Overall, on a combined bill basis, it's approximately a 6.9% increase in 2021, 5.5% in 22 and 23, and then 2.5% in 24. Again, the focus of the ordinance before you this evening is 2021 and 2022. As we've worked through this process, we talked about various scenarios and assumptions. When we first came before you in January, I believe it was, then in 2020, we had a 6.3% overall change in the combined bill for the city's customers. That's the blue bar or the left-hand bar where we have the original proposed and the recommended tonight in 2021 and 2022 in the red bars. So you can see slightly higher in 21, but no change in 2020, and then slightly lower in 2022. A lot of that driven by bringing reserve balances down to their target levels, shifting capital out where possible, utilizing the general fund excess reserve for wastewater as we develop the overall transition plan. So in summary, we do need rate adjustments over the next 2-year period and ultimately over the next 4 years. As we go through this, water can be deferred till 23, storm drain till 22. Solid waste rates adjustments are necessary given the impact of the increase from Island County on the disposal cost, and wastewater rate adjustments are necessary as has been projected based on the overall target levels to meet our annual debt service payments. And with that, I will take any questions on the overall process or discussions that we had this evening or prior. And then next steps are the public hearing and moving the rates as directed by the City Council into the budgeting and revenue projections, and then implement the final approved rates for the January 2021 billing process. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor and council for any questions prior to the public hearing.
Thank you, Sean. So time for questions from council before we open the public hearing. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, we will move then to open the public hearing, and I'm going to turn it to our city clerk, Julie, to talk to us about our public comment and COVID-19, et cetera.
Thank you, Mayor. As previously noted, the city published a legal notice for tonight's public hearing in the Whidbey News Times on October 3rd and October 10th. The information for the proposed rate adjustments was provided on the city website. Again, our public comment methods provided were completing a comment form on the city website, sending the city clerk an email, leaving the city clerk a voicemail message to be played at the council meeting, or completing a written comment card at the utilities office. The city received a total of 13 comments regarding Ordinance 1899, 1 via direct email to the city clerk, and 12 via using the comment form on the website. Those 13 comments will now be displayed on the screen for the public and council to read. Council was provided with all comments received in advance of today's meeting.
Okay, so that concludes, am I on? Yeah, that concludes the written comments that we've received. And I would assume then if there are no other public comments, Councillor Heisen?
Just a comment regarding the comments. I think that seeing those really underscores the necessity of our having hired a public information officer, and definitely highlights the need to do some serious public outreach. The majority of those were, I suspect, the result of a massive misinformation campaign. I mean, they were just parroting the same false narrative over and over. So, yeah, despite the multiple presentations and meetings, all of which are viewable and easily understandable, there's clearly a major misinformation narrative happening. So if there's anything that I can do to assist staff with some kind of further outreach, I would be happy to do so. But other than that, I mean, this is a pretty straightforward, necessary action. So that is all.
Thank you, Councillor Heisen. Any other, before I close the public hearing, any other? Yes, Grant Weed. Mr. Weed.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Just from a procedural standpoint, if there aren't any other public comment, this would be the time to close the public hearing, and then council can commence to deliberate and take whatever action it deems appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Weed. So I'll close the public hearing at this time and turn it back to council for additional deliberation or action on the motion. Councillor Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. First, thank you to the citizens that weighed in. Thank you to staff, Sean, Korn. I know that there's a lot of work that goes in. There's a lot of work that's been going into this, and it's been an ongoing topic for some time now. You know, for me, I continue to really struggle with this. I think if times were normal, to use Councilmember Heisen's words, and I think they were very accurate, I forget how you phrased it, Tara, but basically, you know, this, for me, normally this would be a fairly straightforward process. The city is just trying to provide a service and cover the cost of those services. And one of the mistakes we as a city made many, many years ago, before any of us that are sitting here now were involved with, was I don't think we did a good job of having incremental increases that kept pace with inflation, that maybe kept pace with the rising costs of the services we were providing. And so when we were finally faced in 2010 with this daunting task of building this treatment plant, it obviously facilitated the change in the rate structure, and we tried to save and escrow some money away to minimize that. Councilmember Munns, Mayor Pro Tem Munns alluded to that earlier. But in the end, rates have gone up because this is a project that was needed and it has to be paid for. Having said all of that, while this is something that, like I said, I would normally approve, at this time I'm struggling with, and I don't think I can approve it because of the economic condition that we are in as far as a country, and specifically though a city, because that's where our purview lies, is trying to manage our city's finances and take care of our residents. When I look online, I'm reading things about people selling their comic book collections to pay rent. They have 2 cars. They need both those cars to get to work, but they have to sell one of them so that somebody can make it to work. I know this is very difficult for staff. We're in a budget period and they're trying to line out capital projects for the next 2 years. But I don't know for me if this is the right time to send this through. There is no doubt in my mind that it's absolutely needed. It's paramount that, once again, we continue to keep pace with inflation and be able to pay for these services. But there might be, I think it's Mr. Wiesner's term that he's used, and I wish he was here tonight. I think everyone should have to vote on this one. Nobody gets a pass. You know, he's talked about sliding that time scale to the right a little bit. And I don't know, for me, exactly how far right that is. If it's in several months, if it's in the spring, when we're through some of this, if there's a vaccine available and really the economy starts to open back up. But I'm still, personally, I'm an optimist by nature, but I remain very bearish and kind of nervous about what the fall might bring. So at this time, I won't be supporting an increase in the rates. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Korn, if we choose not to do anything, then we have to dip into reserve funds again to cover, I'm guessing mostly our debt services, to make up the difference. So it would be another $600,000 to $700,000 from January to June? Just approximately.
Ballpark, yes.
And it's hard to, I mean, we can't let the city collapse. I don't know if there's any wiggle room to not move it from 102 to 113. Just partial, I mean, I don't know, we have to pay our bills and we don't want anyone to be laid off or default on our salaries to our own employees, because that's not helping the situation. So I don't know. Maybe Mr. Bailey would have some suggestions. He has seen lots of other city budgets on if there's any type of compromise or something in the middle of what we're facing tonight.
So I see Mr. Bailey's here, but we do have another counselor. Perhaps we could listen and then Mr. Bailey, perhaps, or would you like to respond now? Okay, let's listen. Let's call on Counselor Goebel with questions or input.
Thank you, Mayor. Counselor Serrades, I totally have a similar feeling as you do right now, approving an increase, asking people to pay more money, even if it's an extra $10 or $15 a month. For some people, that's a huge burden. I was curious, what would happen? So if I'm looking at this combined single family monthly bill impacts, basically from 2020 to 2021, it'd be going up like $13-ish a month. So that's like $150 a year, which could be a huge ask to some citizens of Oak Harbor. What would happen if we didn't approve this now and then we went back in the spring, maybe when there was a vaccination and the economy was somewhat normal? Would that increase from 2020 to 2021? Would the increase then like become, instead of an extra $13 a month, we'd be asking people for an extra $24 a month? I mean, we're still going to hit them with some kind of increase later on? Would it just make it worse? I mean, or I guess how much worse do you think it would be then? If that made any sense, I don't know.
It did, thank you. This is Sean Korn with HDR. So it would increase the impact in the future for a couple of reasons. One, specifically when you look at sewer or wastewater and solid waste, then we are running both of those reserve funds down below minimum targets in the next 2 years. And so if we would need to use more of those reserves, which means we would go further below those targets. So not only would we have to make up for the compounding and the revenue we lose by not adjusting rates today, we would also have to increase rates more in the future to get our reserves even up close to where our target reserves were. On the wastewater side, the other concern is absent a rate adjustment, we would not be meeting our 1x debt service coverage, which means from a legal standpoint, the utilities could not issue additional debt because the financial markets are going to look at that. To me, that is a big issue on the wastewater side, is absent a rate adjustment, even with using reserves to pay for it, which you could, when the math is done to look at the financials of the utility, it's not going to be a positive outcome on that. So it does compound over time. Sorry, that was a long answer to a somewhat easy question.
Thank you.
Councillor Wassinger.
Okay, one of the public comments that we read, I thought had a fairly good, solid question for us about the reserves and about the 20 to 25%, and why we needed that and why we couldn't dip into that. And I thought that was a good question that maybe a lot of the public probably has too. I know we've been over it, but maybe if you could explain why that's necessary and why it would be a good idea or not a good idea to use those funds right now in this situation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that 20 and 25% is our industry standard approaches. Those are reasonable targets in the utility industry to establish a minimum target reserve balance. And on that side of the equation, when we're looking at what funds are in the bank to be made available for emergency situations, capital improvement needs, or operating costs that occur for an emergency situation. We are going below those on the two funds that are really, I think, in my mind, of concern tonight, the wastewater and solid waste. We are burning those down to minimum levels through 2022. And so that's where solid waste reserves actually in 2022, even with the rate adjustments, are below that 20% target that the council moved it down from 25%. And that's really driven by the increase from Island County. So the increase in recycling and disposal costs. On the wastewater side, with the current plan, with the rate adjustment for 21 and 22, we go below starting in 22. So we're down at about 20% in wastewater. So we dip down to that lower level, similar to what we established in prior discussions for storm drain and solid waste as part of that. Solid waste drops down to about 18%. So deferring would drive those numbers even further down. And on the wastewater side, could eliminate those funds rather quickly, given the need to pay annual debt service and pay the bills.
Councillor Heisen.
Thank you, Mayor. That is the thing that I'm concerned with. I mean, nobody dislikes the idea of increasing bills more than myself. I've been unemployed for a year, so I get it, and I hate the idea. But what I'm concerned about is that if we defer this, what we're going to have to do is charge more later. And so obviously it's the preferred position now not to make any increases, but the question I wish, there's just the yes or no question I wish we could ask people is, would you, understanding that your bills are going to be even higher later, do you still want to defer this now? That is the big question, because we can't just put off the same increase. The longer we defer it, the more expensive everybody's monthly bill is going to be. And that's the situation I don't want us to be in. And as Councilmember Servadius alluded to, it's because previous incarnations of the council were so hesitant to spend money on big capital projects and to increase rates and keep up with inflation that all of that builds up. And now we have sticker shock, which, like you said, is a compounding effect of decades of decision making. and I just, to use one of Almberg's favorite quotes, I don't know if kicking that can down the road is going to be beneficial or helpful. I don't know. It's very, it's an extremely difficult decision. And I am concerned about the debt service payoff that, Sean, that you mentioned. If we aren't able to cover that, if we don't take action tonight, what kind of a hit will we take, if that makes sense?
So you could use existing reserves to pay the debt. So the bills, at least in the short term, you'd be able to pay for the wastewater enterprise with wastewater rate revenues and available reserves. But if we're paying, approximately $1 million for debt service from those reserves, that drops those reserves down to pretty much nothing in a year or two. The bigger issue is if you are in technical default of any of those loans or the revenue bond, which is the more critical aspect, that bond can technically be callable, which means the investors could request the refunding of that debt. And so that's what a couple of years ago, there were several municipalities that went bankrupt. That was part of those issues, is they were unable to fund that debt service. That debt service became callable and they were unable to pay that debt. That's the challenge with the revenue bond aspect of the debt service, which is a good chunk of the overall debt service for the wastewater utility.
Thank you. And that, to me, is not an option. I mean, as a city and as stewards of these funds, that can't not be an option for us as city leadership. So how do we avoid that situation while having the least immediate, financial impact on our residents? I'm not sure if there is a solution or a middle ground there. If we could, if there's a minimum, maybe a minimum revenue that would cover that possible default. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking out loud. I'll shut up and let somebody else talk. Sorry.
So, okay, we have Councillor Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure who this is really directed to. I guess I'm speaking to everyone who's listening. I've been watching this thing for many years, 10, 15, 20 years. And I see everything coming. I'm in business. I'm experienced in this. And I don't know the answers. And this is no disrespect to anybody. But in business, and what the council does with these dollars, there's hard decisions that need to be made. And now is not the time. I agree with Council Member Servadius on this, but also I'm reluctant to agree with Council Member Munns on this. I have yet, through this whole process in my first year on council, that anybody has proposed cutbacks. Now, I'm facing financial situation in my business. I look at cutbacks immediately. Where can I trim? Where can I cut back? Now, you can look at operations and maintenance. You can look at staff. You can look at many different things. But I'm sorry, but I've heard a lot of different things from my constituents, some stories very similar to Councilman Servadius. I was approached on one senior, approached me. She has had to give up certain medication so she would have money to pay for utilities. So at what point in time would it be prudent to set an example for the city where they incur some suffering and some sacrifices to justify somewhat of a rate freeze with no hikes whether it's for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, possibly up to 12 months. Have we as a city and our administrator, have you looked, where can we cut back? Now, I did tour of all the facilities here. You know, I wasn't born yesterday. Frankly, I see some room where we could be doing some trimming and as good stewards to show our residents that we're willing to suffer as a city to get through this pandemic and to make it over this hump. No, nobody wants to damage their credit rating, including mine and my business, which has always been good. But again, this is not the time. I do believe that we should take a second look, a third look at where can we trim. And I see some things in operation maintenance. I see some things with staff. I look at payroll. I look at dollars. I look at everything. Where can we do some trimming? And you've heard all of these comments tonight. Some of them are somewhat derogatory, but some of them make sense. But there's a lot of people that are so frustrated, they're not even commenting on record. So again, I just can't support this at this time. Thank you.
So, Mayor Pro Tem Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm thinking this is more a Mr. Bailey question. It's hard for the city or government because all the money is funneled into certain line items and you can't just switch them around. So if we save money in the Parks Division, that can't go to pay the debt off for wastewater, or let's say we don't fill certain, some employees have retired and we don't fill those. We've done that the year before, but that money from that savings can't go to the utility fund. And so that's what makes, in my mind, unless I have this wrong, so difficult. We can't just swap money around and make cuts here, you know, like, okay, we're not mowing the lawn, or we're not doing this, we're not doing that. We're so tied up and have to be so transparent and specific, I believe, in the line items. If you could add some light, and if you have any suggestion, it would be welcome.
Well, Mayor, if I may.
Yes, certainly.
So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Munns, and I wasn't going to forget your earlier question as well. I was just bidding my time, but again, thank you. And again, I think many of the comments that have been made are very cogent and right on. When managing a utility, it's important to set aside resources to refresh or replace major significant assets, as Councilmember Servatius observed very early on in this conversation. And to anticipate that for many years, because it will always have this kind of consequence. It'll always be this sort of pig in the python sort of notion that to approach and fund a project of this magnitude is always challenging, but certainly should be addressed as early as possible in terms of rates in order to help mitigate the increases that are bound to come at some point. Now, specifically to your most recent question, it is very true that it is not only best practice, but it's the law in Washington State that each of these various accounts have to be managed in a self-sustaining sort of way, so that sewer revenues are specifically dedicated to supporting sewer activities, both the operating budget as well as the capital needs of that utility. The park budget is typically part of a general fund or some more generally available resources. But as you say, the resources in one fund are prohibited from being used to benefit a different fund unless specifically provided for by law. So in this case, the general fund can be used for any governmental purpose, and as council earlier chose, use some of the excess surplus in that fund to help mitigate the rate increase, and that is within your purview because the general fund by its nature can be used for any governmental purpose. Conversely, however, other funds cannot. So there are not other funds available to help mitigate and offset the increases that are borne by the sewer account for both its operating and its capital needs. I would say that, again, to the question you asked very early on, I've been involved in working with Sean on looking at these rates as well as with other staff, specifically to your point. And that was, what was the minimum necessary in order to meet the debt service coverage that Sean described earlier, as well as the operating needs as identified in the budgets in terms of these rates and rate increases. And I'm sorry to say that as a result of our having had those conversations earlier on, we've essentially identified what we felt at the time were all of the available options for mitigating the increases that have been proposed this evening. So I don't have any additional suggestions for further mitigation of rate increases. I think that the other comments that have been made about if you put off these rate increases, it'll essentially have the same effect of having the prior rate increases that could have been incorporated to help provide for this capital need. They put those off, and now you're faced with this issue. To the extent you continue to put this off, it'll just make the issue more challenging in the future. That's certainly true. Lastly, I want to say that, and I'm glad to answer other questions, but one other thought I had pursuant to this conversation is the debt service coverage is more than just whether or not you can meet your debt service. As Sean mentioned, you can certainly pay debt service out of reserves and further draw down reserves if that needs to be the case. However, each year there's a measure of debt service coverage that's calculated and reported on by the city to the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, the MSRB. And they maintain this information on their website, and I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's EMMA. And each year the city reports, as every city who's issued debt reports, the status of their debt service coverage to EMMA on the MSRB. And not meeting that debt service coverage as provided for in the pledges in either the revenue bonds or the state revolving fund loans constitutes a technical breach of the covenants in those when you adopted the ordinances that approved the issuance of that debt. It's a technical breach. It's not like you can't pay the debt service, but it would be inconsistent with the promise that was made by the city when it adopted those ordinances. So that's a pretty significant deal, and I think that that's I just want to clarify that it's more than just whether we make debt service coverage or we don't. Will we have to use reserves? It's also it would then be incumbent on the city to identify the fact that it did not meet its debt service coverage minimum in its reporting to the MSRB.
Thank you. Isn't there, I know in utilities before, if someone has a medical problem and it is registered somehow, it's not public knowledge, but utilities, someone there knows you have a medical condition, and so they won't turn off your water if you can't pay your bill.
That's
I
correct.
mean, there are some, not stipulations, but anyway, there's ways to quietly handle that. And I know utilities, if someone comes in ahead of time, and say, hey, this is going to be a big problem, is there something we can work out? So I don't think the city is heartless. But if we are to be good stewards, yes, we are stuck with whatever happened over the years, not keeping up with inflation, blah, 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 blah. But we also can't let the city fail. And I'd rather pay smaller increments, which I think in the long run people would like, than instead of going up $13, that all of a sudden we don't do anything, and now they've got $24 because the tipping fees went up again. Anacortes, for whatever reason, has to charge us more for our water. We can't give those. They have to go immediately into effect. We can't wait to change those rates. As it is, we've waited a long time, unfortunately, with the 200% on the tipping fees for the solid waste. So it's a balancing act that we have to do.
And if I may just comment on your comment, I think you made an excellent point, and one that should be reiterated, and that is that there are programs at the city to help those who qualify, either because of a low income or disability or some such circumstances, that help lower their utility bills. And in my experience, one of the things councils have explored to a significant extent is, well, the rates have to go up in order to cover the costs. Those that really do have a difficult time paying and have, something in their life experience that causes that to be the case, should generate a response that would lower their bill. And so there already are those programs that exist, but one other option, again, that just occurred to me as you were talking, is that the council could further explore ways to mitigate those bills that are really creating the hardships that some have talked about, whether in fact it's an elderly person that can't pay for their medications or something of that sort. There are programs that the council can put in place that will help mitigate the increases on those that are truly distressed by the utility rates.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. I do know that such agencies like Help House, it's the food bank, they have vouchers from Salvation Army to pay for medication. They have vouchers from dentists in town to do emergency dental procedures that come up. They also have vouchers for buying shoes for your kids or for yourself. I mean, sometimes we raise our hands and say, woe is me, and it's hard to admit you need help, but I do know that there are agencies in town, and I don't know, maybe we need to put that out. But yeah, we're caught between a rock and a hard place for sure, but I think we need to do what's right without having it go up so high that we would have a revolt. And then people really couldn't pay anything. So thank you.
So one reminder, if this motion were to pass, these rates become effective when, Sean? Isn't it in January?
They would be in that first January billing, so implemented in January for that first billing after that point.
And so that was another consideration I think staff was putting into this, as Mr. Bailey mentioned, looking for all opportunities, the $400,000 transfer that we already voted on. This will go in, won't go into effect until January. And as tough as it is, it's obvious that if we don't do something now, we'll be doing probably a larger, or facing a larger amount later. But it's council's decision. So Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. If there's no more discussion, I would like to make a motion with a heavy heart, but to be prudent and good stewards of the tax money. I move to adopt ordinance number 1899, establishing water, wastewater, solid waste. I'm missing a word. Drain utility rates for 2021, 2022. I think I'm missing one word that I can't get my...
Stormwater.
Storm
drain.
Sorry.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second that reads exactly like the recommended action. Motion to adopt ordinance number 1899, establishing water, wastewater, solid waste, and storm drain utility rates for 2021 and 2022. Any other input or questions? All in favor, raise your hand. So we have 4 in favor, all opposed, and 2 opposed. So that passes 4-2. Okay, thank you, and heavy heart, we understand, believe me. Okay, then at this time, we will move on in our agenda to item number 7A. Am I right on that, 7A? Yes, Resolution 2029 Bayshore Water Main Emergency Repair. City Engineer Jim Bridges. Jim?
Thank you, Mayor. So, as you know, we have recently repaved Bayshore Drive about 2 weeks ago, and unfortunately, a week ago, this past Sunday, we had a water main break right next to Flintstone Park. The break itself was on an old 8-inch AC, which stands for asbestos cement water pipe, which has been approximately in the ground for 30 plus years. That pipe can usually stand up pretty well over time. Unfortunately, Bayshore itself is built on old muck fill, and so the pipe had settled over time. It had been previously repaired at that same location about 25 years ago. And with the construction of the road construction equipment on top of it, we think that with the soft soils didn't help, and it cracked again right next to that previously old repair. So this is an item we're bringing to council tonight. It's an emergency authorization to get a contractor in there to fix it. We have a temporary patch on it, on the pipe itself, and a temporary patch in the road. And so this, if approved, would allow us to go in and actually remove that old, the original repair 25 years ago, the new repair, and replace about 40 feet of pipe. And then the paving itself would actually repave about 25 feet wide strip by 100-foot long strip of pavement. The water actually lifted the pavement up off of the gravel base. And so it hasn't shown any distress yet, but we're going to wait over winter and actually repave that next spring. This we'll do it at a temporary patch to get us to spring, let that area that bubbled up settle, and then repave that in spring. So the total cost for all of that would be $36,400. And I'll stand for questions.
Okay, I'm sure we've got nothing from the public on that at this point. No questions. So council, questions? Input? Mr. Oborn, did you?
Yeah, I think our city attorney, could you call attention to the resolution presented?
Yes, thank you. I had to unmute myself there. Under state law, RCW 3408-280, public entities, including cities, are allowed to waive the competitive bidding requirements to address an emergency. The method to do so is to adopt an emergency resolution, which has been added to your packet. The resolution has findings, if you will, that justify declaring an emergency, and certainly in this case, I think it easily satisfies the criteria. So I believe the action that council is being asked to take is to adopt emergency resolution. Emergency resolution number, find it here in the packet.
I can read it, Grant. I can go ahead and read it, Grant, the recommended motion.
No, he's looking for the resolution number.
I'm just looking,
20-29.
Just looking for the resolution number, and that is
2029.
2029. If there's any questions concerning the resolution, I'd be glad to assist in answering them.
Any questions? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. No question, but if there aren't any other questions, I'll move to a motion for the resolution. I move that we approve Resolution 20-29, findings that justify declaring an emergency.
Second.
Okay, motion made to approve Resolution 2029, and I didn't try to write that down. Findings that justify declaring an emergency. Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Munns. I think that second was Councillor Wassinger. Any other input or questions regarding that? All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you, Council. So we will then move on to the last item on our agenda this evening, the annual review LTAC committee membership. Our City Attorney Grant Weed, I understand that the recommended action is no recommended action. Discussion item only. Mr. Weed?
Thank you, Mayor. As noted, this is for council discussion, but by way of background, before council at your October 6th meeting was the annual review of the LTAC membership and possible appointment of new members and renewal of terms of current members. While your current city code section 2.66030 calls for 3-year terms of committee members, the terms of some of the current members don't appear to be consistent with a 3-year appointment, and some end at various times during the course of the year. For example, one of the terms, I think for Larry Munns, ends September 1, 2020. I think there are others whose terms end in the beginning of January of 2022. So this situation, I think it was felt at that last meeting, makes it difficult during this annual review process to establish continuity in your membership. So one way I had mentioned that was a potential way to address this situation was to consider an amendment to your code to allow council to extend terms for expiration of all committee members on December 31st of their respective terms. That doesn't mean December 31st of the same year for everyone. So what I've attempted to do is propose some suggested revisions to your code, which are up on your screen right now. And at first blush, it probably looks a little complicated because it is when you're dealing with this issue. And in fact, since I last wrote the interlineated language, I thought of one additional issue that wasn't addressed, which might warrant some additional language at the end of what's inserted. So bear with me and I'll go through it. If council wishes to go in this direction, the language could read as follows: the members of the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee shall each serve for a term of 3 years or for fulfillment of, and I found a typo when I was going through this that pre-existed. It said an expired term, and it really should be or for fulfillment of an unexpired term. So if somebody resigned or moved away from town, there could be an unexpired term. So that word, I think, needed to be corrected. So the language would go on and say, however, the city council will review the membership of the committee every year and make changes as appropriate. And the new language could read, it is the desire of the city council to coordinate terms of members so all expire on December 31 of a calendar year. For the annual review of membership in 2020, that would be your current task. The city council may extend a term of existing members whose terms do not expire on December 31 to December 31 of the year, which is 3 years from the year the committee member's term would otherwise expire. That sounded somewhat complicated, so I included, by way of example, if a committee member's term expires on September 1, 2020, it may be renewed and extended to expire on December 31, 2023. So for that particular case, the individual, if their term's going to be renewed, would get 3 additional months, September, October, actually 4, September, October, November, and December of 2020, plus 3 years, which would take it to December 31, 2023. But that term in that case would now end on December 31. And then it goes on and says appointment of any new members to fill committee vacancies in 2020 shall be for a term which commences immediately upon appointment. So if, say, for example, next meeting, you make the appointments and they were immediately, that person's term would go through the end of this year and expire December 31, 2023. The language that's stricken applied to when this ordinance was first adopted, and it's become superfluous, so I cleaned that up as well. The one issue that this new language, I believe, does not address is what about members whose terms, current terms would expire right at or near the beginning of the year. And I noted that on the sheet with current members' terms, there are 2 or 3 that have expirations in the month of January. So to deal with that situation, language could also be added at the end of this, for example, that would say, for members whose term expires in 2021 and beyond, the council may appoint or reappoint for a term which expires on December 31 of the year which most closely results in a 3-year term. So rather than give somebody all of the upcoming year and then 3 years, it would be just slightly, some would be just slightly less than 3 years, some would be slightly more than 3 years, but in the end, all the members of the committee's terms would expire on December 31, and once you have those terms established, you won't have to wrestle with this issue going forward. So with that, I'll open it for discussion, answer any questions, and take council direction and bring back to you presumably a code revision that accomplishes your desire.
Councillor Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Weed, thank you. There's no easy way to make something simple or something that should be simple. There's no real easy way to do this. I'm curious, is it any simpler? Because whatever language we put in here will need to be updated in a year or two, possibly. We know the names of the position titles: Collector 1, Collector 2, Collector 3, Recipient 1, 2, 3, and then Chair for the 7 people on the committee. Is it any simpler just to list those with their expiration dates instead of the extra language? For example, the person that would expire in January, do we just say whatever that, I don't know what that position is, I don't have that in front of me, but that recipient 2, for example, expires December 31st, 2020, picking a number, 2022. Is it any simpler just to list those positions with their titles and lay that out until I'm not sure how we roll this schedule moving forward. If they're 3-year commitments, at some point we have to have a definitive 3-year term start and end date. Is it simpler just to list that term and then we assume that 3 years just roll on from there. That makes sense?
Yes, that is another choice, and I considered that in drafting the language, and it's certainly a choice council could have. We could keep it more simple just by saying at the beginning of this section of code that the terms will be 3 years, provided, however, council shall have the authority to adjust terms upon appointment or reappointment. So all terms expire on December 31 of a calendar year. And just leave it at that. Give yourself flexibility in adjusting terms of those whose terms don't expire on December 31st to do that. It would be a thing that you would have to do for a couple years in a row because not everybody's terms are up now, but you could do that going forward, and that language would stay in the code and serve you as you need it down the road. So that would be another way of approaching it. And you wouldn't have to go through all the gymnastics of having to read and understand this language.
So just a thought, I mean, I trust your judgment. You've seen enough examples of this. I think you'll come up with a solution that makes sense, but that was just my two thoughts, is calling out the exact terms with language that references a 3-year term and it attends to the appointment question should someone vacate a position. But that's all I had. Thank you.
If I just might make one additional comment, regardless if we want to have terms end on, say, December 31st of a calendar year, we need to amend the code to give the council some authority to do appointments, to make the adjustments for other than a strict 3-year term. To get where you want to go, you're going to have authority, flexibility to do something other than a 3-year term.
Right, makes sense.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Grant, yes, it's nice to see some freshness to it. And yes, we'll have to go through 2 or 3 years to get it even out, but it makes a lot of sense to end on the 31st. And you don't want everyone ending, you have to replace all 7 every year. You want it to be spaced out. So I think you came up with a good plan, and thank you for working on it. We need this very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anyone else on that subject? Okay, seeing no other business, then there's just one item that I have been reading pretty much every meeting when I do our introductions in the beginning, and I don't know why I didn't read it tonight. Island County Human Resource, or Island County Human Services, is providing assistance for rent, mortgage payments, and utilities. You can contact them at 360-678-8284. So there is another number to call and place to go for aid. Any other, seeing no other business, I would entertain a motion to end this meeting. Adjourn. Councillor Wassinger.
I move to adjourn our meeting.
Second.
A motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. We are adjourned.